Hello, I'm Justin, and welcome to Video Creators Lounge. At Video Creators Lounge, we provide a lot of services, including green screen rental, studio rental, video production services. Our mission is about forming community, embracing personal relationships, and communicating through art. Additionally, we like to showcase individuals that have dedicated their lives to helping others and strengthening community. And that's why I'm thrilled to have Jason Ludwig, Director of Institutional and Community Outreach from Straight Ahead Ministries, right out of Worcester, with us here today. Jason, thanks so much for being here. I'm pumped that we get to talk to you today. Thanks.
Likewise.
So tell me about your work, because I think you have a lot of terrific things that you can tell us about the work that you do. I think it's very important for people here in Massachusetts to know what you do, know whom you work with, and how you impact the community. So I'd love to learn more about that.
Sure. So, like you said, our headquarters is based out of Worcester, Massachusetts. I oversee the Northeast region, so really overseeing cities from Lynn to Lawrence, all the way up to Manchester, New Hampshire. And so I've even worked with kids that even touch the communities here in Melrose and Saugus. Our mission is to really see the lives of juvenile offenders be transformed by Jesus Christ. We work with youth ages 14 to 24 years old who are incarcerated inside the juvenile justice system. And the kids that are, I say kids, the ones that are 18 to 24, typically you see those kids up in the adult correction system, up in like Middleton House of Correction.
And so you work with youth, children that are currently incarcerated, but also after they're no longer incarcerated in juvenile
That's
detention
correct.
centers.
Yeah,
Is that
so
correct?
it's pre and post release. And so all the work that we do starts on the inside of the lockups. Like right now, I go into 6 facilities every single week with my partner, Hector Brito. And so what we do, our services, they entail from a variety of different things. The first time when a youth comes inside a lockup, they're usually held inside of a detention facility. They could be in there, from breaking a window to a murder. And so anywhere in between. And so a lot of our kids that we work with are heavily in gang involved, have substance abuse issues. And so we'll work with them the day they step inside of a facility. And so what that looks like, especially for the kids that are just coming in, being held on bail, being detained, we'll provide services to them inside of court. We do a lot of court advocacy. Not necessarily going to court saying, hey, this kid's a good boy, let him off the hook type of thing, but really to support the youth, because a lot of these youth have never really had support in their life. They've come in from broken families. So a lot of times they've never really had much support. And so when we do go to court with them, we're just there to support them. And as well as most of the time it's, a lot of the youth, their mothers are the ones that are involved in their life. And so they'll come to court, we'll offer them support as well. Try to help them out with like the languages of the court, try to take the intimidation factor and the fear out of it for them, and try to give them a little ease and just knowing that somebody's here in not only in your son's corner, but also your corner, just to help work with them as they go through the process of courts, because they can be pretty intimidating.
I'm sure. What is the youngest age someone could be sent to the Department of Youth Services? Is there any, typically, approximately?
I would say after 10. I mean, if it's pretty serious, I mean, they could definitely get locked up. But usually I don't see youth less than, under age of 14 years old nowadays.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I would say even 14 is pretty young, but we do see it from time to time.
And how many juvenile detention centers approximately in Massachusetts are there?
So they've been shutting down a lot of them lately over the last year or two, but right now, currently, there's 41 in the state of Massachusetts.
Wow.
And Straight Ahead Ministries, we are in 32 of them. And so we are providing services with over 70 volunteers throughout the state that go in on a week-to-week basis, doing Bible studies, mentorship, reentry. That's the word you were looking at earlier. The word reentry means working with somebody pre and post release of their incarceration. So
okay,
yeah.
So so the ministry works pre, during, and after.
That's right. Yeah, we believe that in order to be really successful, you've really got to build the relationship with these youth while they're incarcerated. Otherwise, what are you going to do? You're going to sit on the outside of a fence of a youth detention center and say, hey, I'm here to help you out. Come on over. They're going to think you're some nut. So we go on the inside with them and work with them when they're at the most critical part of their life, when they're really down and out.
Do you have an idea or an approximation of how many youth are in juvenile detention centers? Or
Sure. In Massachusetts, there's roughly 350 youth, male and female, currently incarcerated right now in the state of Massachusetts.
And what do you think of that number? Is that, high, low? Is that where it was?
I mean, so I was one of these youth years ago in the 90s, and I would probably, if I was to guess, it'd probably be double that number back in the 90s. And so the Department of Youth Services has taken a big philosophy, their whole philosophy, their whole approach to things is completely different to what it used to be. It used to be just kind of lock kids up and put them away. Now they have a really whole different approach of going about it. I mean, you go in some of these facilities now, I mean, when you hear of a lockup facility, I think a lot of people can imagine certain things, bars on the windows, dark, cavey rooms. But you go into a lot of these facilities now, I mean, they got Xbox inside there, they're getting really great educational services. The majority of the staff actually really care about these youth. And so they speak and treat these youth with high respect, as if like a lot of these guys treat them as their own kids. And so it's a completely different approach than what it used to be back in the 90s. Typically, when a youth gets committed to the Department of Youth Services, which means they're in the state's custody until they're 18, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be locked up till 18. It just means that the state's going to make decisions on that youth's life until they're 18 years old. But there is the thing, where kids can't get committed to the age of 21. So for an example, I just worked with this kid. His name was Trevor. And I won't do last names just for confidentiality's sake. But so Trevor had a pretty serious case, could have been sent to adult prison. And so while Trevor was waiting in detention, going to court, I mean, Trevor did really, really well. I ended up getting his high school diploma inside of the detention facility. And because he did so well, instead of sending him to adult state prison at the age of 18 when he aged out, they kept him in the custody of the Department of Youth Service until he's 21 years old. And so, I mean, Trevor's home now. He's doing phenomenal. And so there are kids that are in there until the age of 21. But that's completely up to the state's discretion.
I see. Because adult prison is a completely different ballgame.
It's a whole different ballgame.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
It's a whole different world. I mean, you're going from right now, currently, the Department of Youth Services, they really do, I would say the majority, they really do care about the youth and the future of these youth, and they do a lot for it. But when you step into the adult system, it's a whole different world. You're just a number then, so it's just good luck.
Sure. How did you get involved with the Straight Ahead Ministries?
One day I was walking down the street, I tripped over a rock, hit my head, and then I decided to get involved with this. Well, to be honest with you, what they say, that there's an old saying, it takes one to know one. Growing up, I grew up in Lynn my whole life. We, come from a really big family, and my family had its challenges. And so at the age of 13 years old, I started to make decisions that got me into a lot of trouble. So I started to drink, I started to get high, I started to party. And so I started to commit crimes. I grew up pretty poor. And so the desire to want things was always there. I kind of got sick and tired of being picked on in school, being known as a scrub with dirty clothes. And so I started to look up to my friends' older brothers in the neighborhood who always had nice clothes, lots of money, and lots of cars. Unfortunately, it wasn't their cars. They were car thieves back then. And so I just started to pick up the ways that they did. And so I started getting involved with stealing cars, doing drugs, and then not to get into a long laundry list of things, but from the age of 13 to 25 years old, I was in and out for 9.5 years. My drug addiction went from just smoking marijuana to a fierce cocaine addiction. We went from, stealing motor vehicles and robbing, small-time drug dealers to doing home invasion, robbing drug dealers, and just to feed the addiction. And so, so I was definitely one of those youth.
I mean, so I know you. I know you through my cousin, and I know you to be a family man. You have how many children now?
Four
children.
Kids, yeah.
If someone just met you, you told them your backstory, I think they would be absolutely shocked.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
But that's just a testament to how far you've come from years ago.
100%, absolutely.
And you got involved in the ministry because they reached out to you while you were in a juvenile detention center?
Yeah, it's funny. I was, so I'll tell you a quick story.
Sure.
So I was 15 years old in a juvenile detention center, and it was down in South Carver, Mass, right in the middle of Miles Standard State Forest. It takes like 45 minutes to get out there. It was called Camp Squanto back then. Now it's called Teamworks. And so I was inside there, and I remember these two guys, John and Tim, would come in on a weekly basis and do these Bible studies. And so I remember them coming in and they invited us out one time. And it wasn't that I really wanted to know much about the Bible, but what attracted me to these guys was that they had this peace about them that I just was like, wow, like I'd love to. They reminded me of my grandmother kind of, because my grandmother was kind of like, you know, she represented peace in my life. She was always like the commonplace when we slept at Nana's house on Friday night. You know, Nana would buy us sneakers, you know, you stay at Nana. So they reminded me of her. And I was just attracted to the peace that they had. So I just went to the Bible study. And so after going to a few of them, I remember they brought this kid in, and he had just gotten out of a pretty serious crime. I think he was involved in a gang murder. And then he had done his time and gotten out, but his life was changed by God. And so when he was telling his story about what God did to him, I seen that same peace inside of him. And I knew that he wasn't BSing me with his story, you know, because there's a lot of guys in lockup. You know, when you live in the streets, you can sniff people out pretty good. And so I said, wow, there's something different about this kid, man. Like, how do you go from that to this? Like, kind of like you said, like, I would never even imagine that with you, you know? And so I remember when I was 15, they asked me, hey, if, you know, God is as real as you and I are speaking. And if you want God in your life, you can invite him into your life. And I remember just praying, asking, inviting God into my life. And I remember at 15, like just feeling like God literally came into my body. It was like this experience. I was like, wow. And so, but I gotten out when I was 15 and I didn't have those resources. I went back to the same family, same neighborhood. And so, you know, I had these great ideas. I want to do something different. And I was like, wow, this, you know, I was going to church with these guys inside. But coming home to try to do all that was like swimming up creek with, you know, just going against the grain of things.
You're just right back in.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but the first time that you went into Juvenile Detention Center, you were at what age?
14.
You were at 14, so young.
I was young.
Young,
real young.
So when you went in for the first time, what was that like? Were you scared as hell, or were you not scared?
Anybody tells you they're not scared, they'd be lying to you. So, you know, there's this thing of like, you know, because you see everybody else in the neighborhood, they're getting locked up and they're coming home and you're like, oh, that's pretty cool. You know, they get some respect. And so, at first, it's definitely nerve-wracking.
And so you walk in there, are you at 14, are you one of the youngest in the group, or were there a lot of kids your age? Yeah,
there was a ton my age. I mean, back then, like told you, like...
This is what time frame, what year?
93, 94, 95.
Okay. Yeah.
The Department of Youth Services, they had so many of us locked up. Like, I felt like our whole neighborhood and our whole city was locked up, you know? And so it was normal in some sick way. They would ship us around the state every day in the back of station wagons and vans, sleeping on gym floors because there was no room in any facilities. And back then there was well up over 60 facilities, if you know, to take a guess at it.
Wow.
And so, I mean, there was so many youth just being locked in. That was it. And so we would sleep on gym floors. There was this place in Westboro. We'd sleep in the basement of this place in literally like sleeping bags and cots and stuff like that until they had a room to send us to in a facility. That's how packed it was. And so,
So I can't imagine that in a facility like that, you're not getting a lot of services straight away.
No, you're not getting services,
These Bible studies were probably one of the only resources that you had inside that could help, right?
Yeah, even when you're in those holding patterns right there, you could be in there for months. You weren't even getting educational services. You were literally just sitting around as a corpse in some basement or some gym floor, just waiting to get placed inside of a unit.
When you do get educational services, what if someone is in there all throughout high school? Do you get a diploma or a GED, or what is it that you would actually get?
Nowadays, like I said, things have changed tremendously with the Department of Youth Services. They do such a great job with the education. I'm telling you, I mean, the staff that overheads the education services, I mean, I'm speaking as one facility, Northeast Detention Center up in Middleton, Mass. They do such a phenomenal job. They really make a big deal. So every June, these youth that graduate, that are going to school, they graduate from their actual high school. They get the diploma from like a Beverly High School or a Saugus High School. And so they do a huge ceremony. They let the families come in. You know, they make a really big deal. So they really do a great job with it nowadays.
But back then in the early 90s.
I can't say that it was bad back then either, but you know, because you did get it, you had to go to school while you were in there. And so I'm not saying it was bad. It's just, it's better now. So.
And so you're pretty forthcoming with your story. I'm sure you probably tell your story a lot as a mechanism to help others.
Sure.
Was that something hard straight away to do, or have you always been very candid about your life?
Yeah, no, I'm just an open book, man. I just try to live my life as authentic as I can. So a lot of people think like, oh, wow, it's great that you have that story. A lot of these kids can relate to that. Yeah, that's true. But my story is not what changes people, like they don't want to hear. There's a lot of guys and there's a lot of organizations that are out there that, people have been locked up and they come out and they think they're going to go in, or, I hear a lot of people, Jay, I want to come in. I want to help kids. I want to tell them my story. Well, the truth is kids don't really care about your story. You're not really that important. They don't want to hear any more war stories. I mean, how many war stories can you tell? And so does it help that I've been through it? Yeah, because I can kind of communicate and I level with them. But I just want to make one thing clear. The really reason why I've changed was because of the experience I had with God in my life. And so when I'm in there speaking with youth, we do everything through a perspective of faith. I want to introduce these guys to the God that I know, who is as real as you and I speaking today. And I know for sure when they do have that experience of God, man, God's the one that's going to change the heart and really transform them. So I'm in there, and that's my goal, is really to hope that they get a chance to know the God that I know.
And so you were saying that your first introduction to that was through the Bible, the groups that Straight Ahead was offering.
That's right.
And it was Straight Ahead back then too. Straight Ahead's been around for how long?
Over 30 years.
Over 30 years.
Over 30 years, yeah. They started the first Bible study in the whole state of Massachusetts.
And so you were intrigued by the peace that you saw from the people that were participating in the Bible studies.
That's right.
You started to participate. You started to like what you were hearing, seeing how it could be valuable, but then you were released and went back into the same environment. And what happened then? Yeah,
I just didn't have the support that I needed when I came home to grow in that type of environment. So when I came home, just kind of went back to the same things. And again, like I said, for the next 9 years in and out, the whole time it was crazy. In the midst of my addictions, I used to get these visions of coming out of a church on a Sunday morning with a suit and tie on. Mm-hmm. And I would literally hear a voice say, you're going to live like those Christians do one day. Whatever that meant, right? And so, and I just always had this weird feeling down deep that eventually everything's going to be okay. It wasn't until I was 25 years old that I was back in on a 2.5-year sentence. And I remember being up there in the unit. And so let me just back it up a little bit. The night I got arrested, I was in the backseat of the cruiser.
Which time though?
This is my last time. This was back in 2002.
So you're an adult now. So then the consequences at this point now is jail, prison.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
And prior to this, what I'm about to tell you, I already served 3.5 years in the adult prison system. So at the age of 17, I got bounced over to the adult prison system, and I served 18 months, and I got out and did another 2 years. And so here I am on my third sentence.
They moved you from a juvenile detention center to an adult prison?
No, when I got out at 17, back then they were charging you as an adult.
I see.
So when I was still committed to the Department of Youth Services when I was 18, but at 17, I caught an adult case. Mm-hmm. And so I was downstairs in the adult holding tank, and then they came down, signed me off, and said, we're done with you, you graduated, good job. So most kids are graduating in high school. I graduated into the adult prison system. And so,
wow.
And so, so I went up and I did 18 months, and I got out and I did another 2 years for another thing. And so finally I got arrested a third time. Mm-hmm. And so I remember sitting in the backseat of the police cruiser saying to myself, I don't know how I'm going to change, but I'm never going back to this lifestyle again. And the reason why I say that, because the whole prison system, everything is around behavior modifications, self-help, all this other stuff, whether it's anger management, it's AA, it's NA, it's, whatever it may be. I did prison boot camps, all these different things that kind of man-made programs, not to say anything bad about AA, because I believe that really works for people. But all the other things kind of hey, if you just manage your anger, or if you just control, if you don't go here, you don't go there, you can change. And those things just don't work. And they never worked for me. There was more for me, they were more external changes than they were internal. And so that last time when I was locked up, and when I said that in my head, I don't know how I'm going to change but I'm never going back to this, because I did everything the prison system already asked me to do. I'd done everything, you know, I've got, you know, and so those things just never changed me. And so, but I remember that experience I had with God way back then. And I went to a service one day.
This is now a service inside prison?
Inside a lockup, yep. I just got sentenced to 2.5 years.
Okay.
And I go inside, and the preacher that was up there says, you can't serve two masters. You either serve God or you serve the devil. I had this moment that flashed before me right on the spot where every single road, I had this picture landed here in lockup. My addictions got worse. All my sentences, they were getting longer. And so I just had to, I said, sure the heck's haven't been, I don't think it was God then. And so I said, all right, God, I said, if you're real, I says, I need to know you're real. I says, because I'm not going to believe this guy in his Bible. And if you are, I'll give you my life right now. And I'm telling you, Justin, I had a moment where I literally felt, you know, the Bible talks about the Holy Spirit. I felt God's Spirit literally come into me. Scales fell off my eyes, like literally, like I seen things completely different. The desire to want to get high, all that was gone. Like it was like just gone. And I used the rest of my time, the next 2.5 years, as if like I was in seminary almost. I got a job in a chapel. I was just learning more about God. And I remember that day going back to the unit. There's 120 guys on each unit inside of, I was in Middleton House of Corrections at the time. Every block, every unit has 120 guys. I remember going back that day on the unit. There's a saying that everybody always says in lockup, oh, you got to keep it real, keep it real. And I'm saying, keep what real? You don't even know who you are. Because the first time in my life, I realized that my whole life I was hiding behind a lie, like just this false identity. I mean, you think of the world we live in today, it's like everybody has to identify with something, right? And so I was living a life, this false identity, all these different lies. I was just, you know, I'm from Lynn, I'm a car thief, I'm an addict, I'm a convict, all these different lies, these different identities that we take on. And the truth is that they really weren't me. Yeah, those are the things that I were getting into, but it wasn't me. And I seen that same image and same facade that everybody was talking about, that all these guys that go around say, keeping it real, keep it real, they don't even know who they are because they're hiding behind an image that we started to build up when I was 13, 14 years old, when I was a young boy, scared little boy with dirty clothes on, didn't know who I was, trying to make an image of myself so I would just be known.
Wow. That's yeah. And certainly me knowing you in your adult life, those stories, they don't sound like you, the person I know at all. And it seems like in some cases, the catalyst was that you didn't want to continue leading that lifestyle, but what allowed it to happen was by inviting God into your life and that was your path. I
just couldn't deal with the pain anymore. I couldn't look in the mirror like, I didn't even know who I was. I just had nothing. I was just nothing. You know what's crazy too is so when I got hired with Straight Ahead back in 2011, when I came home in 2004, I was looking for those two guys, John and Tim. I wanted to say thank you because I remembered them, because it was that seed they planted in my life way back then that I believe to this day that seed was planted in me, and God's the one that sustained me. Because I look at all the guys that grew, I can't tell you how many people are dead, or there's nobody still out there, or they're doing life in prison. Why me? Why was I, you know, like why was I excused from all that? You know, like I know I did my time and stuff like that, but like, and I truly believe it's because God had his hand in my life from that day when I accepted him when I was 15 years old.
Okay.
And so I looked for these guys for 6 years and I couldn't find them. And I was me and my wife. And so I just kind of gave up on it.
So when did you get married? How long?
So I met my wife in 2004, and then we got married 10 minutes later. Yeah, so it was a quick one. So,
that's okay. So you got married soon after. When you came out of prison, you were a changed man at that point. What was it like the day that you walked out? What was that experience like?
Yeah, you know, I came out to a 12-step halfway recovery house in Saugus. So I was over there, and I was at this transitional house. So I was come home, just got a job. I was working at the Porthole restaurant in Lynn. And I had an electronic monitoring bracelet around my ankle. So I was working over there for $7 an hour. And then I got connected to my church at the time was in Melrose, called the Vineyard Church. My old pastor was Mark Fee.
Oh, okay.
And so I was just getting connected to the church. And for me, I needed to develop a whole new community around me of people who were growing in faith and just moving in the same direction that I was. And so for a little while, it was just a little awkward because you felt a little lonely a little bit because the temptation to want to go back to your city and see your friends and family and stuff like that, the desire was there. But I just knew that I was so content with in God and like what He had planned for me, what He's done for me already, that I knew that He was gonna, surround people in my life that was gonna be needed to help, kind of raise me up and stuff like that. So, when I got connected to my church, they really embraced me over there, showed me a lot of love, and just brought me right in with them. And so, yeah.
So it's interesting that experience that you had when you were 15, that interaction that you had with Straight Ahead stuck with you throughout the entire time of going through juvenile detention and then even later on.
Yeah.
And you sought them out after you wanted to to thank them is your primary.
Yeah, like I said, coming home, the chaplain that was up in Middleton House of Corrections, Ray Perez, still to this day, he's like my spiritual father. Mm-hmm. He was the one to really help kind of grow me inside the facility. And then when I come home, it was mind-boggling. So here's this chaplain inside of a prison inviting me as part of his family to his house, he's with his daughters and his sons. Mm-hmm. And so, he's the one who got me connected to the church over here. But I was looking for those guys to say thank you, but I was never able to find them because I just, hey, here's some of your long-term fruit. Thanks a lot. Well, here's the crazy part. When I got hired I didn't even know it was Straight Ahead Ministries. Mm-hmm. I had no idea who they were. Mm-hmm. I got hired with Straight Ahead in 2011. The only reason why I got hired, I was a barber. I'm a barber by trade. So I was cutting hair from the 2004 till about 2011. So I was cutting hair in Burlington, the Ray's Barbershop. Mm-hmm. But a little plug for Ray's over there. And so when I was going on a missions trip down to Haiti with my church, and so I was just emailing the other Vineyard Church in Salem, New Hampshire, and I seen on their website they had, they were supporting Straight Ahead Ministries as like a ministry they support. So I clicked on Straight Ahead because I always knew about them, the youth, the type of youth they work with, and I just asked if I can volunteer with them. Long story short, just for time's sake, I ended up getting a job with them. And the first week that I was employed at Straight Ahead, Scott Larson, Dr. Larson, does these classes over at Gordon Conwell. So he has a bunch of people from all over the world here doing his classes. So he says, hey, we want to introduce you to our new staff member, Jason Ludwig. Jason, would you mind sharing your story? So I'm telling my story, right? And I started talking about John and Tim. At the end of it, Hannah, Scott's wife, who started Straight Ahead, said, Jason, did you know that they work for us? I'm like, come on, get out of here. No, wow. Seriously. So I got to be reunited with them after all them years. So it was not only like to find out Straight Ahead Ministry, but the ministry that planted the seed in me is now the ministry that I'm having a major, huge role in. Want to talk about, that's no coincidence. That's crazy.
Right. Yeah. Right. And when you were reunited a couple of years later, did you recognize them straight away?
Yeah.
Did they remember
missing
you?
some hair and stuff like that, but yeah, I did.
Did they remember you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, John and Tim both remember me. John is the international director of Straight Ahead Ministries. He does tons of work in Ukraine and stuff like that with the Juvenile Detention Centers over there with youth.
And so now you've been working with Straight Ahead full time for how many years?
This is coming up in my 10th year.
10 years.
10 years.
And was it when you first started working for Straight Ahead, was that the first time you started working with youth?
Yes. Yeah. But I was working with another organization, volunteer with New Brothers Fellowship. And so they work with adults coming out of lockup. They do a lot of work with them too. Another great organization. They're all over Essex County.
It seems like a common theme, no matter what someone's path is out of, a life that is not working for them. It seems that community is part of the recipe that is a crucial piece of the puzzle of making it work. How would you say that's
100%.
Right?
There's no such thing as a self-made man, as much as people say they are. But we were designed to be in relationship. God made Adam and Eve. And so we were designed from the beginning to be in relationship. Nobody does well alone in isolation. It just doesn't work. And so I think the only way, my journey came through Jesus Christ, through my faith. Others go through AA, and whatever your approach is. But if you do look at the basic component of all of them, it is done in community. You need community.
Right.
Yeah, 100%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even people that, just everyone seems to suffer when they're isolated.
Right.
There's a whole epidemic. I read an article recently about with the advent of all this technology that people are just feeling an overwhelming sense of loneliness, and that can have a negative, byproducts of that.
And they're selling prescriptions and every other commercial on TV.
That's
for this
right.
stuff.
I mean, you don't necessarily have to, steal a car in order to embody, negative effects of loneliness. Right.
That's right.
So
absolutely.
when you first started working with youth, was with Straight Ahead.
Yes.
What was it like? I'm sure they have a lot of training. I think from what you told me, there's a lot of training, a lot of you're kind of working with people, you're learning their process of helping youth. But what was it like the first time you helped a child or a young adult?
Yeah, I mean,
do you remember? Was it an experience for you? Or?
Well, I remember walking through the door the first day at Straight Ahead, and I just knew I was at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was offered a youth pastor position at my old church, and I turned it down because I didn't really want to work with suburb kids. And so I was like, yeah, I'm good. I says, I'd rather just wait. And, I just didn't feel like that was my kind of calling type of thing. But, and so, going back in and starting, go back inside of the same facilities that I was locked up in, that was kind of a trip.
Was it hard the first time?
It was, you felt a little out of place a little bit. You got your palms sweating, a little PTSD coming back. But yeah, I mean, that all went away. But, to be involved in youth life that really have no shot. I think of my kids, it's like, they have such a great life. My son, we argue from time to time.
Yeah.
And so, typical stuff. But for me, it goes beyond just helping a youth because it's such a ripple effect, right? Because each youth, it's not just keeping them out of lockup, but it's like if their lives have changed, it's going to have a ripple effect to their family, to their communities, to their schools, to the workforce. So it touches, one life touches so many others. And I think of my life, thank God my kids don't have to see the same stuff that I seen growing up. They're not going to have those experiences. And so they have that shot to live the life that they want to live. But bar none, if people didn't come into the facilities that I was in and they didn't have an impact and show me a different way, then who knows? I mean, if I had kids when I was living that lifestyle, I mean, that would have just been just another chain reaction, the same thing, just another generational curse just happening, just continuing on with the addictions and the incarceration. And so when one life is changed, it changes a whole community.
Did it help you even when you first started at Straight Ahead or started with other organizations that you were helping? Did it help you personally to help others?
Yeah, I was always told by somebody, it's always good to have somebody above you and below you, in a sense of not in a demeaning way, but it's always have somebody that's pouring into your life and someone you can pour into their life. And so I think it's very effective. I think it definitely helps you. It gives you some type of purpose. When I'm in there, I feel like this is my purpose. This is my calling, being able to go in there into these facilities and just connect kids with God.
That's another common theme you see a lot, or you hear a lot, is that helping others get out of a path that you have successfully achieved is another aspect that's critical to helping yourself in a lot of ways. Do you feel like it would be a lot different for you now if you weren't helping youth and doing what you're doing? If you became a mailman as opposed to doing what you're doing?
I was a barber and I was still going inside facilities. And so I don't think it's the specific job. I just think of what's in your heart, the way you're going to put, how generous are you going to be with your time, just with your life. And so you can pour out in many different ways. And so I would say that it's great that I'm able to do this full time. I mean, it's amazing. But when I was barbering, I was still able to and wanting to go into facilities, and I was. And so I think it's just really kind of where you see value and where you want to pour out your life into.
Sure.
Yeah.
So can you speak about how youth can re-enter and participate in the community and how Straight Ahead Ministries plays a part in that piece of their recovery?
Sure. So we collaborate with a lot of different, faith-based agency. We're Christian, and so sometimes that can be a pink elephant in the room to people like, oh, they're trying to suck them into their, their thinking or brainwashed and that sort of thing. And so, everything we do is completely voluntarily. There's a lot of organizations out there, I don't want to name them and stuff, but where they have a lot of their youth are court ordered to go there. They have to be forced to come there, right? And so that don't work. And so we understand, like, if you're not ready to change, you're not ready to change. There's nothing I'm going to do or any other organization is going to do, because if you're not ready to change, you're not going to change. And so we'll go in and, when, if we're going to a new facility, we'll just introduce ourselves and say, look, if there's a party that wants to change, we're here for you. If you don't want to change, the door's always open, but now's not the time for you. We don't want to waste your time, and don't waste ours. We take the approach of, like, everything we do is completely voluntarily. We don't allow people to be court ordered to us and none of that stuff, because it just doesn't work. We believe in strong collaboration. We believe that a whole community coming together is going to be best fit to help these youth. And so we'll have a different agency that does the education. We collaborate with different agencies that do mental and substance abuse counseling. We do work with different agencies that do, like, jobs, and so housing. And so the better you can collaborate with others in the community, the better off they're going to be for the youth.
Sure. Now, when you visit these detention centers now and you look at a kid that's 14, are you sometimes struck by how young they look to you? And part of the reason why I ask is because does it help you actually, in a weird way, kind of forgive yourself a little by recognizing, oh my God, 15 is young. You bear a lot of responsibilities. You even feel that sense of responsibility of where you've taken your life, even at that young age. But then as you get older, you realize, wow, I was really young at that time. And maybe I shouldn't beat myself up.
I get what you're saying. I think for me, when I see these kids so young, it's more like my heart just breaks for them, because I see the circumstances they're living in. And it's funny because, like, there'll be times, there's a few times during the week I'll work at night, till 9 or whatever in facilities, and I'll be driving home and it'll be late, and sometimes you just see these young kids just walking on the street. And then I'll even talking to my partner, Angel, he does all the work out in the Worcester area, and he has kids of his own. And then we said, I'm like, can you imagine if Zachariah or Liliana was running the streets like that? Or if Jason or Josiah was out, I can't picture it.
But that was you.
And that was me. And that was me. And it just, it just goes to show the resources these kids don't have at home. There's no adult supervision. It's like, the parents are either addicted, alcoholics, they're absent, one parent family, whatever. There's so many different, scenarios, but at the end of the day, it comes to these kids having resources of people who truly love them or know how to really love them. Maybe because their parents have never been loved themselves, and it's just been a trickling effect. But it's really sad. My heart just breaks for them. It really does.
And how much does alcohol and drugs, would you say that plays a role in...
High 90%.
The answer, Mike, you knew exactly...
I knew exactly where you're going.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
90%. And in most cases, this is kind of would you characterize it as kind of a secondary problem, or is it
sure? I think I think the way alcohol abuse, substance abuse are communicated is like it's like kind of like the primary problem, but to me it's only a manifestation of what's really happening inside of the heart, right? So I don't believe you're born an alcoholic. I don't believe you're an addict. I don't believe it's a disease. I think that's a bunch of BS. I think it's a racket. Listen, I was the worst drug abuser. It's a manifestation of coming out of a place of brokenness inside of your life. And it comes out differently in different people. It may be alcohol, it may be drugs, it may be sex, it may be gambling, it may be violence. There's so many different ways it manifests in people and so it just depends. And so I think it's a secondary issue. I don't think it's your primary issue.
Right. But 90, that's a high number, 90%.
When you're not clear with who you are and you're broken as a person, it's a way people escape it to feel good, or it's unfortunate. And then once you get caught up in the lifestyle, it's hard to break it.
I'm assuming a lot of the times you're meeting with someone that has been brought into the juvenile detention for the first time. You might even be meeting with them on the first or second day or third day. Is that correct?
Yeah. Within the first week for sure. Sometimes the first day, maybe, whenever we get back in but definitely within the first week.
And what are some of the common themes? What do you hear? I mean, I would assume they're scared. Is that of being there? And there's a lot of unknowns?
Naturally, majority of them are scared. It's kind of shock and awe, like, oh, this is real, and so it's not like it's a scary facility, a scary place to be. But sometimes it can be scary. It's definitely scary for the youth, because they're away from home. They're in an environment they have no idea about. The same rules they came from at home are not the same rules they got to deal with inside facilities. Most of these kids that come from the streets and from homes that don't have boundaries and rules, they come to a place, now there's boundaries, now there's rules. You need to listen. There's a bedtime. There's a time when you actually eat. There's a time when you have to go to the bathroom. You're going to shower. You're going to go to school. And so it's a whirlwind almost. It's a shocker for a lot of these kids because of that.
Is it true to say that some of them are actually experiencing withdrawal and maybe under medical supervision at that time in the first few weeks if they've used drugs?
So I would say, so withdrawals would typically come from heroin. Alcohol is obviously the worst thing to withdraw from, but I see kids that are typically in the juveniles from 14 to 17. I don't see tons of that, of the withdrawals from heroin because maybe they haven't made it to yet. 18 to 24, now it's a whole different ballgame. I work with a lot of youth that are encountering withdrawals. And so they're either going to detoxes. If they're in an adult facility, they are getting treated for that sort of thing. So typically I may not see, especially in an adult facility, I won't see them for that first week because for the first week, they're going to be in the infirmary getting treated for the withdrawals and stuff like that before they're okay to go out into regular general population.
Sure. But
inside the juvenile facilities, I don't deal with anybody withdrawn from the heroin and stuff like that. You don't see that a lot.
Yeah. Okay. What is the process, when you're meeting with someone that has just gone into the juvenile detention center? Where do you start? When you first meet with them, what's the process?
So I just go up and introduce myself to them. A lot of, these, you have to win the trust of these youth. Otherwise, and so I really have no agenda. I just go in my goal is to really try to kind of bring some peace within their own chaos in their own little world. Just letting them know, hey, look, man, I know it seems bad, but it's going to be okay. And just talk and build a relationship. This is where I think my story comes in because I'm like, I've been there. I've been where you're at. And it is like, and then they just perk up like, oh, okay. And then I'll start to say, hey, look, what's going on with court? When you're going back to court, one thing we do is court advocacy. If you work with us, there's something we can help. Oh, really? Yeah. So, and then they have a ton of questions about court, and then I'll answer all their questions and, the terminology. And then you just start to see them kind of relax a little bit.
So throughout the years, you must have picked up so much information just on the legal world, which I'm sure it's not something you necessarily thought of when you first started working, but now
it's like secondhand. It's like another language, right?
Now you're just a few steps away from passing the bar almost,
right?
I
was thinking about exactly.
So, okay, that's interesting. So
when you can kind of, because they have a lot of confusion going on in their minds. It's a whole new world that they just came into. The court system's brand new, and it's fearful. It's like, oh, you could be doing this amount of time. What's this mean? What's that mean? And so you're coming in and you're just bringing clarity into their world, and it just naturally just brings down the peace, and just explain this is how it works in here. This is how. And it helps them out. So, and then I say, hey, look, if you want, I try to always build a relationship with the parents too.
Well, I was just about to ask you, do you meet with the parents
I think it's
all the time? Or
as much as the parents are willing. So every youth I come in contact with, I always ask them, you want me to call mom or dad, whoever's at home? I think they'd appreciate knowing that somebody's in your corner. And so, and I'll contact just about but a lot of times, unfortunately, you deal with parents that are addicts themselves and they really don't care. Oh, I go to court for him, and it's like, but then you do have parents that do care and like they're super appreciative that, you're not only helping with the youth, but you're also working with them as well. And so I developed long relationships with the parents, with the families, because I think the more you can encompass everybody, it's going to be better off for the youth and stuff. Because the parents, they go through it too. Everybody thinks, oh, it's the youth that are doing time with someone. The whole family does time with them. And so, and the family feels shame too. It's like, I know I'd feel like if my son started going I'm like, you naturally would think that looks bad on you. What did I do wrong as the parent? It's because that's the way it's kind of communicated subconsciously. Like everybody like, oh, look at that kid's kid. What did they do wrong? I can't believe it. Oh, I'm not surprised the way he turned out the way he is. Do you know his mother? And so.
So for the parents, for those parents, and I'm assuming also grandparents and
Sure.
uncles and other people that want to get involved in their life, what could you tell them? What would you tell them?
I mean, first of all, not to be ashamed of it. It's not your fault, and to communicate it. Like just get people around you that's going to help support you in this process. Learn about the process, and also a lot of times when if somebody gets locked up or they do something, of course you're going to be frustrated as a parent. Of course you're going to be angry. I said, but when you continue to stay in a posture like that, of being angry towards your kids, to being judgmental or just like, this tough love, I believe it only separates you from them. And so how do you stay in your kid's life with love? Also, I'm not saying be without boundaries or consequences. That's not what I'm saying. But how do you continue staying in your child's life and support them and love them through this process and have conversations and try to figure out like what's really going on in their life rather than making assumptions, like,
Sure.
oh, I know why he's doing this. Or, oh, why don't you ask them what's going on, and how can you support them during their time in lockup and then as they come home as well.
How can you support during the time in lockup? What do you do?
Yeah, I think the best thing for you talking for me or parents?
For family members, parents.
I think that the best thing to support them while they're in lockup is to go in and to visit them as much. The kids they need to know they're loved.
Okay.
And so any way that you can to show them that you love them, communicate them. Don't just assume that they think that you know them. Like you need to let them know that you love them and that you're there for them. And even as awkward as it may be, have those conversations with them, and support them through their whole time and try to be. And also, I think a lot of times I see a lot of parents, they don't really know how to support them. They think if I just do this, it's kind of like enabling them. So I think maybe getting some type of, there's resource inside these facilities. Like a lot of times in these juvenile facilities, what they'll do is they'll offer like family counseling so everybody can do it together. Engage in those, jump in those. But when people hear counseling, they say, oh, there's something wrong with me. But it's like jumping in and learn something.
That stigma
right?
still, even in 2019,
Right.
that stigma still is there, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's too bad.
It is too bad because I think it's a fantastic resource. Even me, in the work that I do, I have to meet with somebody just to kind of be able to process all my feelings and stuff like that. So I need counseling in this job too to sustain long term.
How many children do you meet with on average? I mean, whether it's on a week or by month?
Well, I'd say on a weekly basis, just here in like the Essex County area where we work. And when I say work, and this is not, I'd say 150, 175 youth a year, just, really just work with them.
It's gotta have an impact because you see it all.
Well, for an example,
An impact on you.
yeah, it does,
personally.
especially for some, you got the success stories, but then there's the stories that aren't so successful. And that's a reality too. I'll talk about this, and I won't use names because they're local, but this one particular mother, I had a great relationship with her, and I had a great relationship with her son. He was a little bit older. And so I built, he was one of my favorite kids inside of Straight Ahead. And unfortunately, it ended wrong. They found him in a third floor hallway with a needle in his arm, and he was dead. And so, I am, ordained pastor myself. And so they asked me if I would do the service. And so to sit down in the living room and just start to write everything out for the funeral, it's gut-wrenching. You're walking in, seeing the pictures of him when he was just 5-6 years old in his grandfather's lap riding a lawnmower. So, and then there's other instances. I remember another kid that I was working with and, doing really well, and active gang member Lynn gets shot in the face twice. To go visit him in a hospital, with half his face gone. And that stuff is traumatizing. And then, so it's these things like that if you don't take care of yourself, self-care, counseling, you're not going to be in this long. And those are, unfortunately, those are the realities of this work too. No, those are real.
Were there times where you said, I can't do this anymore?
No, never. There's too much at stake.
What keeps you working with children? What keeps you, when these times are hard, what sustains you through that?
Yeah, first of all, I heard it is my faith with God and knowing that this is my calling and my purpose, and so I rely on Him, and the stakes are too high. It really is. It's life or death, and if it's not theirs, it's going to be somebody else's, and so the stakes are just too high, and just you get too far in it, and you just it's one of the things. It's like, what are you going to do? You're going to rely on somebody else to do the work? Mm-hmm. You can pull. How are you going to engage in it yourself? So I can sit on the sidelines and be a fan, or I can engage in the game, and I choose to engage.
And you have a support system, and you have a wife that supports your work. I assume that there's some days that you come home and she can see it on your face.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I mean, my wife is super supportive of everything I do in this line of work. A lot of times I don't tell her what happens with youth because she wants to take them home, and it just breaks her heart, So I try to limit some of them. But a lot of times she knows about them anyways because she hears about the major things, or you see them on the news or whatever. And so, yeah, so having her to be there, I mean, she's my, she's my partner in life. She's my rock. And so, just super grateful to have a supportive and loving wife that, that backs me in all this. And then,
well, it's part of your own community, right?
It is.
We've been talking about community helping even for you, it's important for you to have your own support network and community and family.
And I get a lot of my joy too, for me, my family, like my kids, my wife, they're my number one priority, above the work that I do and everything. And so I get a lot of joy just being at home, simply just sitting at home sometimes just with my kids. But I love coaching my kids' teams. I get a lot of joy at that, going fishing with whether it's taking my son out striper fishing until 4:00 in the morning at night, or coaching in baseball games, or just getting drawings from my little girls. I mean, sure. that stuff, that to me is for me, that's foremost number one in my life is my family besides my relationship with God. And so I'm always kind of going to the well with that stuff, looking forward. Like when I go home, I look forward to going home because the reality I see in a lot of these kids' life isn't the reality that is at home.
So the work that you do, there's some low lows, but there's also some high highs,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
And, can you tell us a couple examples that really bring joy to you, kind of some highlight moments that have just made you ecstatic with happiness?
So I can, there's loads of stories like mine. My story's not unique. There's a million of those stories, right? I could tell you a laundry list of guys and girls that lives have changed. But I'd like to try to, if I could just give you like the context, a snapshot, the heart of the organization, it would be in this one story.
Okay.
And so I tell you, everything that we do is really, we truly believe that God is the one that transforms hearts, and that He gives you a new heart. And I believe that everything people do in their life comes out of the deepness of their heart. And so if you're a hurt person, hurt things are going to come out of you. And if you're a well person, well things are going to come out of you. And so we were working with this kid, Kevin, down in this lockup down in the South Shore. We're doing this 3-day seminar that we do called Ready for Life. And so, and I remember this one kid, he's from Haiti. When you met this kid, Kevin, he was just super sharp. I mean, so well educated. You just like, what is he even doing in here? Just like brilliant, like just super sharp. And so Kevin was from Haiti. He moved to the States when he was maybe 12, 13. But he went on, we're like, we're wondering why is he here? And so Kevin's issue was that anytime people got close to him in his life, he would just explode, So he had violence and he could never have healthy relationships. And so when we got chatting with him, Kevin's father.
Physically close or emotionally close or both?
So when people get emotionally close to Kevin, It would, he wouldn't want it. So he would lash out, and he would have all type of broken relationships in his life. After talking with him, Kevin, his father used to beat him all the time, even to the point one time his father threw hot sauce in his eyes. Ugh. And so, in the way Kevin's mechanism was, if this was a kid in the United States, they'd be getting high or, get involved in sex or whatever it may be. But Kevin used to run to school in Haiti, and he would read books. Kevin said that his father would beat him because his father couldn't control him or whatever. And so he developed this hatred towards his father. And so this is what really kept Kevin in lockup in his own prison, like you were saying earlier. We think it's the external stuff. We think it's the drugs that keep us captive. We think it's the prison that keeps us captive. But when we do these trainings, if you go inside of a facility and ask people in there to raise their hand, how many in here have resentment or unforgiveness? Raise your hand. I guarantee you every single one of them will raise their hand. And if they don't, it's probably because they're lying. But you will get 99% of the room that raise their hand. So what's that tell you? There's issues. It's like that iceberg. You see 10% of it, right?
Sure.
But underneath the iceberg is the big thing. And so that's like our life. We operate mostly under the surface subconsciously. And so we were doing this thing, and I was starting to tell my story about how those people in my life that I needed to forgive, that I was carrying a lot of anger and resentment towards, and that the day I was able to forgive them was the day I truly was able to get set free. Because unforgiveness and resentment, it's like a cup of poison you mix up for your enemy, but you drink it yourself. And people think forgiveness is for the other person, but actually forgiveness actually means to let it go, so to release it, because it holds you captive. And so we were doing this thing, and then so the next day, on day 2, we come back in, we're debriefing with the large group, and so hey, what came up for you guys yesterday? Just kind of open it up, and he stands up, and he's got tears in his eyes, and he says, "I was able to forgive my father last night." What? I was able to forgive my father. I completely understand it now. I know what forgiveness is. And he was able to forgive his father. Today, he hasn't gone back to prison. This is probably 3 years later. He's doing phenomenal. He has a great relationship with his I believe his wife now, and he has a child with her. And so that's the heart of the organization. That's what we're after, is the heart. That stuff right there, when you can get a hold of that, that changes everything. But until you can really get a hold of that stuff, you will continue to be inside your own prison, no matter where you go. Prison is what's inside your heart, not in an external place.
What was it like to hear that from him that day?
Yeah, it's powerful when you hear them things, because you know they get it, and you know when they have those experiences, they're never coming back. And so it's like you get this rush of joy, you get emotional. It's like you're super excited with them, and so that right there, and there's other stories that are like that. I mean, it's just, that's it right there. It's like my goal isn't to get somebody out of lockup, to get them a job, to get them housing, to get them stable. Like, yeah, that stuff's necessary, but that's not the goal. Like, to me, that's not success. Success to me is when you be completely transformed from the inside out, and you get clear with who your true identity is, and that you no longer harbor resentment or unforgiveness towards people.
What are some of the challenges for someone, a juvenile, coming out of the facility? And what are some of the strategies that you put in place that would help a youth make that transition?
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge, a lot of them is, especially with youth, they're not able to go get their own apartment or leave the city. So they're going back into the same environment that it's always been there. And so that's like first and foremost. And so what we do to try to kind of combat that and come at it is that the work that we do is we go right down the street level. I mean, we're working with these youth one-on-one, like daily. We have a couple sites, one in Lawrence, so we bring them to the office. We work with them, and we'll help them do other things. The jobs are always the easy thing to get, because it's like, but can you keep it? And so we work with these guys, really trying to develop them in their identity and who they are in God. The ones that don't want to have a relationship with God, because there's a lot of them that don't, and that's fine, we'll mentor them. But the same thing, we'll just mentor them one-on-one with them and just help them. It's in everyday life, just having a place with them where they can have real conversations and not be judged. And really the biggest thing we do is just try to get them looking towards a future, because Right now, most of these kids, that the lives they're living, it's pretty bleak. So it's tough to see a vision beyond where they're at. But if we can help paint that and show them, look, this is possible, and walk alongside with them little by little, and accepting the fact they're going to make mistakes, they're going to fall, but that's okay. But let's keep moving forward. Because the more they move forward, the more they experience in life, that's, the brain just starts to change. And so, and then when you get to experience new things rather than listen to it, and you experience it, things start to change and hope starts to really develop.
So it's like making those small steps incrementally.
That's right.
Consistently.
Rome wasn't built in a day.
Right. And for youths that are being released, what would you say to them if they're coming back to that same environment, and you could speak directly to them? Who knows, maybe someone here is watching this video and they are coming back to that same environment, and they might be scared about having a similar experience than they had in the past. What would you say to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a million different things you can say to them, and there's a lot of different things that probably people want to come up with some clever little, saying for them. But if I was to say one thing, I understand the circumstances they're coming back to, and there's a lot of challenges. And I understand that circumstances and other people's issues have been passed down to you that kind of put you in this position. But I would say that to stop blaming people for your life and stop playing the role as a victim. And what I mean by that is when you play the role of a victim, you stop choosing for your life. You allow circumstances to dictate your reality or your future. And so when you stop playing victim, the best thing you do is take responsibility for your life. And when you take responsibility for your life, you're taking back your power to choose. And when you start to take back your power to choose, you can choose a different future. And your life, no matter is being dictated by your circumstances or your family or your surroundings, because you're choosing a different future. And so I'd say at the end of the day, now that you're older and at this age, you have the power to choose. And that if you don't, you choose what you want. And the results that you get in your life, when you look in the mirror, you know that it's because of the choices you've made and nobody else made at this point.
I like that. I like that a lot. If you are a family member or a parent and your child is going, will be released from a juvenile detention center and is coming back to your home, what could a parent or a family member do in preparation?
Setting up healthy boundaries. It's kind of a tough question, right? Because it's such a broad range of people. And some people would say, what's a healthy boundary? I think I am doing healthy boundaries. And so, but I think at the end of the day, really just showing love to your kid, expressing that love and providing resources, just really being, I would say, be totally engaged in your kid's life. Don't just push them to the side or, don't start categorizing them. Don't be, just fully engaged.
Straight Ahead Ministries will help parents and family members of troubled youth as well.
For $59.95. I know.
But they will, right? They'll come in and because it's a whole, right? That's what's
absolutely
needed.
Yes.
A lot of the times, right?
Yeah, I like I said, I speak to parents all the time and offer them support and they love it. They love it. It's just, I think it's nice to know that, there's people in your corner, you're not alone. Because they feel alone too.
For the average person that might not know a lot about this world, what could you say to them if they were speaking with someone, a troubled youth?
I think people encounter those kids every day, especially if you have kids.
Right.
And it shows up like this. I don't want you hanging around with those kids down the street. Stay away from that kid.
You hear that, yeah.
Well, that kid is the one that they should probably be engaging with, because that kid is the same one, not only you ostracizing him, but he's being ostracized by his family too.
So that's an opportunity.
That's an opportunity. That's an opportunity right there to just get curious about that kid. Why is he that kid? Why don't you want your kids hanging around that kid? Invite them over for dinner. Yeah. It's gonna be awkward. You might be nervous. I get it, but think about, imagine what you can do and the influence you can have on that kid to change him to be a different kid. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love that. If someone wants to
get involved with the Straight Ahead Ministry, what are the various ways that you can help? That anyone kind of watching this video, if they wanted to get involved, how could they help?
Sure. I mean, so there's many different components. It doesn't have to, you don't have to have, our faith, stuff like that, because if you do believe in this faith, I mean, you can go into facilities and do Bible studies, do mentorship. If that's not your kind of cup of tea or whatever, maybe you have, a business that you can help employ some of these youth. Maybe you're a teacher and you don't mind tutoring. A lot of our kids need tutoring. Maybe.
And where would they go in order? I mean, can they reach out to Straight Ahead?
Yeah. So if you go to the website, straightahead.org,
okay,
all the resources, you can click on there. And so it's one of the things where it's like, what do you have to bring to the table? I don't want to limit it. I mean, it's like, again, strong collaboration makes, best practices, especially for the youth, that's going to help them with a long and successful transition. And so, so whatever you have to bring to the table, then, we can definitely use.
That's great. Okay. You had mentioned that it was very different for you than it is today. What things have changed from kind of the early 90s to now? What are the major things that you've seen that are different, and are they positive? Are they working better? What's better?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there's a huge difference between the 90s and to what they're doing today. It's definitely,
What's the biggest improvement that you think?
The care they have for the youth. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they're not locking kids up as easy as they once were. And so I think they were super happy about locking kids up before. I mean, you have to think about it, it's a big business anyways. And so they're making money off every kid's back. Everybody gets locked up. And I mean, the prison system's a major business. So,
is there a lot of private businesses, private
prison systems and
in Massachusetts as well?
Right? There's definitely some private facilities for sure. Yep. So it's a business. And so, but the approach now is really about, I don't have the Department of Youth Services mission statement, but if I was to kind of, from working closely to it, they're really about empowering the youth, getting them the resources they need, trying to help out the family around the youth as well. And so where, before it really wasn't, you just kind of went through the routine, you're getting locked up, and you get, back in the 90s, you get a caseworker, and, it was just, they were willing to lock you up all the time. It was just,
And
even the facilities are different.
If you don't get locked up, is there a type of probation for kids as well? Or
yeah, so like when you typically first get arrested, you'll get assigned a probation officer.
Okay.
Yeah, but then
and you won't necessarily get locked up.
You don't have to, no. But if you violate that, you're going to get locked up.
Sure.
But if you pick up another case, you'll get locked up, and you move from just a probation officer, a probationee, to someone who is committed to the Department of Youth Services, which you get. You're in the state's custody 18, meaning they can decide what they want to do with you, whether to keep you locked up or send you home. Sure. And you get provided a caseworker to work with you individually. And, they have strong assessment plans they do with youth. They're really involved with, setting goals for these youth, making sure they're hitting them. And it's a really totally different approach.
Now, as a youth, will your record go away? In the event that someone had a troubled youth, they went into a juvenile detention center, but thankfully they, maybe even through the help of Straight Ahead, got things together. They used your program, the resources that you provide, and as an adult, never experienced a problem again. Is that on their record?
Juvenile records are gone.
All gone,
yes.
Right?
Adult records will stay.
And even if the juvenile was in the juvenile detention center past the age of 18, because they felt that we don't need to send that person to an adult prison, let's just let them ride the time out in the juvenile detention center, even though technically they're an adult, that still gets eradicated from
as long as they were charged as a juvenile.
Charged as a juvenile.
Right. I mean, some kids get split sentences, like the case of Trevor I was telling you about. He has a split juvenile and an adult. So the adult part, they suspended that sentence, but he does have an adult record. But And so it just depends on how they do it. But if it was charged as a juvenile, you're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we talked a little bit about the difference between the 90s and today. How do you see that the type of your work changing in the future? What would be utopia? If you had unlimited resources, what would you be doing more?
I know kind of the vision where we're heading with Straight Ahead. Our goal is to be in every facility and throughout the whole country, so each and every youth can hear a response to the gospel of Jesus, and then eventually throughout the world. And then,
and you're doing a fantastic job in Massachusetts.
Yeah, we've been the state's #1 partner for the longest time. Yeah, yep. And even as a faith in a place like Massachusetts, where faith is really not kind of people's doesn't really get people excited too much. It's kind of, it's a big divide here, between people of faith and not. It's like this, and so working inside of it's pretty amazing actually to have that partnership.
It's unbelievable.
And I think, because
what did you say at the beginning? How many? 32 out of 41?
Yeah, we're in 32 out of 41 facilities.
That's amazing.
And we're hoping to be at 100% saturation rate soon. But
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's just it. It seems like with the juvenile detention centers that people look at it as a place for rehabilitation and not punishment.
Yes.
Right? Now, adult prison is not looked that way.
No.
And that's wrong. Isn't that wrong?
Yeah,
should not even the adult prison system be looked at as a place for rehabilitation and not for punishment?
I agree. Because you're only just cultivating the same thing over and over, and you go inside a lockup, and the older you get, you start to lose hope for a future, and then you just start to accept that this is what you're going to be and what you're going to do. And so you go inside, you meet new people and more resources, and you continue down a lifestyle rather than, and there is some movement around this. There is some stuff that's happening around trying to get adults educated. This gentleman, Ben Thompson in Boston, it's the Boston Reentry Center. He started a thing where these guys are learning computer classes, they get in their education, that sort of thing. I think education is a huge piece of this, and then there's another organization called Partakers. And so they go into Norfolk State Prison and they offer educations from Boston University, and Boston University gives it to them for free. And so there is some things moving in that direction and that are doing amazing work like that. And so there is some hope for that coming. And I think there needs to be a lot more of that, especially like in the trades. You'll see that also in Essex County, Sheriff Coppinger now up there they're doing some work in Lawrence at the farm. They got some different trades that are happening for guys inside of lockups, so it gives them more opportunities when they're coming home. So I think the prisons are starting to catch up to this. It's kind of like the old school with the new school. You got the guys from the old school still in the prison system working there, and it's going to take until these guys are retired now till that the new stuff starts to make way and make a lot of sense and everybody's on board with it. But yeah, it's moving in that direction. There's still a ways to go.
Sure. People that want to get in touch with the Straight Ahead Ministry, they can go to the website, which is
straightahead.org.
Straightahead.org.
Yep.
Now, is it possible for people to get, someone maybe watching this video and wants to get in touch with you directly?
Sure.
Can we give that out?
Yeah. So my email will be J, Ludwig, Ludwig @straightahead.org.
It's a thrill to speak with you. You do such great work. Thanks for coming in, and I hope to see you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Justin. Thanks for having me, brother.